On a conceptual level anyways, there was something that excited me about Guy Ritchie taking on the legend of King Arthur. After all, legends often become just that as they're passed down from generation to generation, growing in the retelling and morphing into something that often is much more epic and mythic than it originally started out being. And if there's any one thing that Mr. Ritchie has proven his adeptness at, it's scripting and directing oral histories in a way that are uniquely energetic as well as cinematic, using the motion of his camera and the pulse of his editing to communicate those stories as much as the words being spoken. And no, that style isn't necessarily one that those who grew up in a more classical rendering of this tale would find appropriate for it. Nonetheless, I was willing to give it a try, hoping that it would produce something surprisingly fun and maybe even fitting. And I will tell you right now, the moments that dared to fully embrace that style I thought were far and away the most interesting. In a number of instances, it really did bring to mind Baz Luhrmann's usage of modern music in The Great Gatsby. No, not period appropriate, but still translating that era's style and customs into something that we, the modern viewer, could find more relatable. On top of that, in nearly every one of Ritchie's films, whether Snatch or 2015's The Man from U.N.C.L.E., the filmmaker has quite successfully crafted characters whose greatest adversaries are their own prides and egos. They want to be not only a respected boxer or spy, they want to be the best boxer and spy. And there were a couple of moments in King Arthur where that same feeling really propelled the characters forwards in a compelling way, especially Jude Law's Vortigern. In a couple of instances, you could really feel that man's struggle against his pride and the heartache caused by his own hubris. Unfortunately, the aforementioned positive elements were really not enough to hold up the rest of this mess of a film. This really did feel like a situation where the filmmakers, or the studio, or both, just did not know what film they wanted to make from the outset, and consequently were constantly adjusting things during the shooting and the post-production, in an attempt to reconcile what story they had been telling with what story they were now telling. Really, all of this film was just raced through as if it had some better place narratively to get to, only to, when it got there, kind of feel muddled and unearned, making me scratch my head and wonder, how did we get here again? And more importantly, why? This was the grand finale for which we rocketed past all of those would-be important narrative beats to get to. Like actually seeing this character learn about that important piece of information, or actually believing that this character who was diametrically opposed to something would realistically change his mind. And to make matters worse, those grand finale moments really just were these unacceptably horrible CGI fests. Set pieces that were embarrassingly reminiscent of Neo versus Agent Smith from 2003's The Matrix Reloaded, but without that scene's cool choreography, camera work, and editing. Also, on the technical side of things, the decision to color grade nearly this entire film to look like a darkened Game of Thrones forest just north of the wall did nothing to help its narrative coherence. When you have characters talking a mile a minute, describing individuals and events that we've only just perceived, we need every bit of assistance to allow those pieces to stick out and in our minds, and making nearly everything visually look the same did us no favors. In a similar way, the filmmakers made the very unfortunate decision to have nearly this entire film underscored by this drum beat, which I can only imagine was put there to keep things exciting and propelled forwards, but in the end just kept me from really settling into any moments, able to digest the story and grasp its characters. The film that in recent memory reminds me most of Guy Ritchie's King Arthur Legend of the Sword is actually David Ayer's Suicide Squad, a film that also has a couple of positive elements going for it. A really solid cast and a director with an appropriately distinctive style. But unfortunately, in both cases, those elements were just steamrolled by this convoluted narrative that really never knew what it wanted to be or where it wanted to go, which in the end seemed to lead both filmmakers to decide that the best way to make their films tolerable would simply be to race through them, hoping that the audience would at least thank them for a quicker, painful experience. And for all of these reasons, I will give the film a 1.5 out of 5. I would still love to know what you guys thought of the film though, so definitely comment below and let me know. And if you guys are kind of just completely turned off to watching this film and don't want to watch it at all, I would not blame you. However, I would recommend Guy Ritchie's previous film, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. from 2015. It seems like a film that too few people have seen, and I actually just watched it recently, and I really enjoyed it. It kind of reminded me of a fun kind of old James Bond style film, or more recently kind of a Kingsman the Secret Service film, but with less of that kind of film's dark humor, which for me was just a little bit off-putting. So I would recommend that one to you guys. And finally, please do subscribe. I'm going to continue to review films and television on this channel, and I would love for you to stay up to date on all of those things. But for now, I'm Chris Hartwell. This is The Heartbeat. Thank you for joining me.